All right, so call to order the first regular public meeting of the West Sacramento Public Financing Authority. And we're going to start with the pledge. And why don't we ask Mr. Esquivel to lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, 4 of the 5 authority board members are present. Councilmember Beverly Sandine, Nick Esquivel, who is a member of the West Sacramento Economic Development Housing Commission, and no introduction required, Mike McGowan. We're awaiting the arrival of Councilmember Chris Ledesma as well. And the staff that's, Mr. Tuttle, do you want to introduce the staff associated with the authority?
As proposed in item 5, the authority's attorney is Jeff Mitchell. Our assistant city manager would be overseeing the finance plan, Phil Wright. Paul Bloomberg will play a huge role. Constantine, who has been responsible for much of the great artwork, along with Aaron Laurel. And in the far back is public member / assistant city manager Amanda Berlin. And Janet Chapin is our clerk tonight.
She needs to sit closer to you so she can tell you what you think.
Oh, I know what I think.
That's never been a problem.
That's kind of the problem, Mark.
All right, then let's, this is an appropriate time, Madam Clerk, for the oath of office for the two non-city members.
I, Nick Esquivel,
Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
solemnly swear that I will support the
and the
Constitution of the
Constitution
United
of the State of California
and the Constitution of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without entering any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without anti-mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
well and faithfully
and I will and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
discharge the duties I'm about to enter.
All right, then with all of the members of the authority sworn in, we'll proceed to presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the authority. I don't see any members of the public present, so we'll proceed to item 4, which is overview of the formation process for the proposed enhanced infrastructure financing district number 1.
All right, good evening, board members. This will be very brief. I know that the members who were of the city council saw a workshop on this item back, it was way back in October now, but it's much the same information. For the benefit of the public members, board member Esquivel, we did a commission presentation not too long ago, and I had the opportunity to meet with board member McGowan to go over some of this. But so consider this just a refresher of what this is all about. So this starts back in 2012 when the city did the community investment plan on the heels of losing redevelopment, as the plan was at that time the goal to identify mechanisms and funding to keep that effort of redevelopment going in West Sacramento. So what we honed in on was this little known tool, infrastructure financing districts, that had some serious issues with being able to use it effectively. So we pursued legislation, and about 2 years later we got bills in place to allow us to do what we're doing today. So that's the bill that was SB 628, Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. So this is all about tax increment financing. I think everyone by now knows what that's about, but as the district collects revenue, that's in that green section, the base value still goes to, in the city's case, it actually goes to Measure G, which is used for infrastructure and various other purposes, and the green part would go to the district, the EIFD funding. So like I said, SB 628 enacted the ability for cities to use this tool. Essentially, the projects that you fund or the activities you fund through an EIFD have to have community-wide significance. That's not really defined anywhere, but I think we have a good idea of what that means here in West Sacramento, what types of projects we're talking about funding. And then the prerequisites for this, we meet all of them. You cannot use the school district's funding share. And you also have to be through with your redevelopment dissolution. This chart, I would just refer back to if you had any questions about any of the limitations or really the differences between what we were used to in the past, having a redevelopment agency versus an EIFD. But in general, one of the big differences, you have to have a public finance authority as the governing body, as opposed to RDAs, which was the city council. We have talked about, pursuing additional legislation to change that, so that in our city, since we are a single entity EIFD, could the city council be the governing board? That's not the case today. We're not sure if we'll be able to get that done this year or even in the next session, but we'll continue to work on that. But for the time being, this is our PFA. The planning document, the infrastructure financing plan, I'll cover that in a minute. That's kind of an important topic for tonight. But the rest of this is just sort of a comparison between the two tools. And similarly, the list here is straight out of the legislation, plus some additions that we have interpreted in terms of the types of infrastructure improvements that we would be looking at. And we are really looking at this tool to be a comprehensive funding source for all sorts of infrastructure projects, and even including some uses that used to be traditionally under redevelopment, like brownfield cleanups, supporting sustainable communities projects, that sort of thing. Conversely, what you can't use EIFD funds for, it sort of goes back to why we have the Measure G funds still in place at the city. So you can't really do studies, you can't do things like planning documents. Probably most importantly for this purpose is you can't fund maintenance. And so as we go forward with the district, and especially as we do the infrastructure financing plan that includes a fiscal impact analysis of how the district affects the city, we'll need to be mindful of some of those things, that the district will have to leave behind some of the property tax increment to fund maintenance and to fund administration of the district. The boundaries also in the staff report, but in general for the city council members, and I think Mr. Esquivel, when we took this workshop, this may have been slightly changed. The only addition was in area, I believe it's in 1E at Sacramento and Jefferson. We added what is effectively the shopping center there where Arteagas is. That wasn't part of the original area, but it was part of the redevelopment area. So that, I believe, was the only change to the boundary from the workshop version that we are proposing. And just to give you an idea of that former redevelopment area and the EIFD area, it's about 1,300 acres smaller, and most of that is due to some of the residential and school properties that were taken out, and the area on the west side of Harbor Boulevard that we were advised by our consultant, and staff also recommends that we leave it out because it could have adverse effects on the fiscal impact analysis of the district. So in terms of the flow of funding, because we used to have a redevelopment agency, most of the area or all of the area in the EIFD was in the redevelopment area. So the way the funding will work, it's much like we have Measure G now. As the county collects the property tax, there's the property tax trust fund. So consider all the old debts of the redevelopment agency subordinate, the EIFD is subordinate to those. And as those are paid off and the distributions are made to the taxing entities, that's effectively the same money we get from Measure G. Now Measure G will be capped. It'll be capped at this base year of 2016 fiscal year, and everything going forward would be EIFD revenue. So on the PFA board, just a little bit about your role and what the board is here to do. So obviously there's 3 members of the city council, 2 public members chosen by the council. It's just like any of our other commissions, so the Brown Act and all the other things listed there. And the other thing is we're looking at this not being a frequent meeting that we have. In the beginning, we're going to have a few meetings to get the district in place. But once we're there, we look at this as sort of the district board will affirm the city council's direction in terms of how the funding will be allocated. So the city council does its annual CIP. We anticipate a lot of it will come through that.
Our capital improvement program?
Sorry, our capital improvement program, right. But the board would be responsible for the fiscal side of the EIFD. You're receiving the funding and allocating it to projects based on, at least we anticipate based on the direction of the city council through the capital improvement program. And in terms of the schedule, so tonight we are mainly, the main action tonight that Paul will cover next is directing the city to prepare the infrastructure financing plan. That's sort of the, like the redevelopment plan used to be. It captures everything that the district will fund. It has the tax income projections. It has that fiscal impact analysis. And so the city actually prepares that, and that's according to the statute. And we plan on having a workshop on that plan in March, and then we'll come back to the city council in April to hopefully get the council to approve the plan. And then the PFA will hold another meeting in April to adopt the plan and actually adopt the ordinance resolution to form the district formally. So the EIFD plan, I'm going to have Paul cover this, but this is just a list of contents of the plan. And I'll just touch on one point here, CEQA. CEQA is a requirement for these EIFD plans. And frankly, that's one of the reasons a lot of cities are sort of getting tripped up on the whole process of an EIFD. We were fortunate in that we just were updating our general plan. And so the EIR for the general plan references the EIFD and contemplates the projects that are going to be included in the EIFD plan. So we were able to tie those two together. So the plan is when we go to adopt the EIFD plan, we'll reference the general plan EIR as the CEQA document. So that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, that's the overview. All right, thank you.
Hey, apologize. I see here where it was said the difference between RDA and this animal, and it says like on housing that it's not required.
Right.
Is it within our purview if that were to come up to spend money on housing?
Absolutely.
Affordable housing or some other kind of housing?
So the statute allows you to spend money on affordable housing. Does not mandate it like redevelopment
I'm not
did.
lobbying for that one way or the other. I'm just curious to know if that was a latitude that we had.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Was Paul doing a presentation? You said you were going to leave it to Paul
On the next item.
Oh,
sorry.
next item,
Yes.
okay. All right, and if there's no other questions or comments on item 4, let's proceed to item 5, which is consideration of Resolution 17-1 of the West Sacramento Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Number 1, directing the city of West Sacramento to prepare an infrastructure plan and related actions.
Yeah, so, the key action in front of you tonight is to direct the city to prepare the infrastructure financing plan. One thing I'd say about Resolution 17-1 is it's also jam full of housekeeping items that you have when you form a new, governing body. So you'll see things about the conflict of interest code, disclosures. I won't go into that, but we have Constantine Baranoff who's here to answer any questions you have about that part of the resolution. What I will say is that the action the council took on November 16th, directing the formation of the PFA and the movement towards formation of the district, did establish the boundaries of the district, kind of the goals and objectives of the EIFD, categories of authorized facilities. It gave us kind of the parameters that will help us develop the plan. So as Aaron said, you have this area of the city, roughly 4,100 acres, roughly 14 sub-areas. And what we're going to do, should you direct us to proceed, is to look at development that will occur roughly over a 45-year period. We'll be looking at the base year of assessed valuation of 16-17, and then we'll be looking at the growth and tax increment over that time frame. We've already done some preliminary analysis, and we looked at land uses. We just did the general plan updated course, which had, very aggressive land use scenarios. I think we've tempered that a little bit with input from our economic development staff. And so we will take those numbers, the build-out numbers, and we work backwards to look at a realistic absorption over that 45-year period,
A lot of it will be built out within 20 years, we think, at least the initial modeling. And then we'll come up with an estimate of what the annual flow is. And of course, the real benefit of the EIFD is that it's going to allow us to capitalize that income stream, that tax increment flow over time, like we did with redevelopment, the potential to enter into long-term debt agreements, to bond, should the voters approve that. And so we will do a bonding analysis. We'll look at, well, what if you decided to bond, over a certain time frame, maybe, 10, 20, 30 years? What's the bonding capacity? The plan's also going to look at the list of projects that we wish to fund, that capital improvement project budget. And so we do have a lot of projects that are kind of coming out of let's say, the water and sewer master plan and the new traffic master plan. We have projects that are emerging that we can put into the plan. We're not, in approving the plan, you wouldn't be committed to committing dollars to those specific projects, but it's illustrative in a way that you're showing you have the ability to expend the funds that you would be collecting over roughly a 45-year period. Another part of the plan is that we have to look at the fiscal impact to the city of West Sacramento. So like we did with the Bridge District Infrastructure Financing Plan, we'd look at what's the impact on fire and police and park maintenance and road maintenance. And so you all and as well as the city council would have that information. So when you're committing tax increment, we also know what the impacts are to the general fund. And there will be the flexibility in budgeting to change the amount of tax increment that goes to the EIFD every year. So the plan's also going to kind of show bracket, what if you committed 25% or 50%? And so you'll have that information. And one of the items in the resolutions notes that we will adopt CEQA as our guidelines for evaluating the environmental impacts of the plan, and we'll likely be tearing off the general plan EIR for that. And that's pretty much it. Again, we have a number of administrative items if you have any questions.
When should we anticipate receiving the fiscal impact study?
So we anticipate that we will have a workshop on March 15th with you, and then sometime around the beginning of April, we would have a plan. We think that we're likely going to build another month into the schedule to allow City Council to have a workshop as well. And so originally we were planning that you would have your public hearing on April 19th. We're thinking of moving that to the second meeting, the second week in May, again, to allow that council workshop to be added to the schedule. Currently, the public hearing is scheduled for April 19th.
So when we adopt once this whole process is done, the tax increment share for if we were to determine either us or the city council or both that the tax increment that's diverted to the IFD should be less than the full amount of the tax increment. Is that an authority decision, or is that a city decision, or is that embedded in the plan itself? And how would that? You said that could be determined annually. In what process would that be?
Well, and that's a good question. We're going to have to kind of work through that. This is the first time we've done this, but I can say that I think the limiting factor is that to the extent you enter into debt and you're required to include, annual debt service plus some reserve over that amount, you would have to budget that amount at least every year. And then after that, there's a discretion, and I think that we'll have to come back to you with a process on how that would be decided.
So it's not a component of it's not a permanent component of the plan that we're doing, that this item is moving forward. It is subject to periodic or annual adjustment?
That's correct.
by someone.
The plan, the intent, I believe our intent with coming up with a plan that kind of brackets what the contribution would be will help with the policy, that it's going to be flexible in terms of what the annual commitment is. And then how that's decided, yeah, we'll have to work on.
And, well, how much of how much specificity will need to be in the plan with respect to specific projects, if any?
Well, our intent is to try as much as possible to use the existing CIP plus projects that have kind of come out of the master plans or out of the city council's priorities, and use those to show our ability to expend the EIFD funds. So with the Bridge District IFD, we used rough categories, but it all related back to a very specific plan and a very specific list of improvements. Here, it's kind of the same thing. We've got very specific improvements in the CIP, but the plan itself could be as general as having categories like transportation and a number attached to it that represents, our estimate of what we think the projects are that are out there. We'll also have to show, I should point out in the plan, we have to show kind of other funding sources and what we think those will be. And that's consistent with how we structure the CIP right now. We'll show so much development impact fees or so much federal and state funding. And then EFD revenue kind of looks like the way we used to program redevelopment tax increment, which was always part of the CIP. And it was a category of funding that was just part of the funding stack for a project.
Yeah, but I'm asking partly because of this two-stage, semi-distinct, between this board and the council. I'm trying to understand how much in real-time flexibility there is with respect to project investment. I mean, how much does this board adopt the equivalent of the CIP as a board action annually, or we're not meeting every single week either, and so to the extent to which there are projects or grants or other sorts of things that in the time period that you're describing, we could reshuffle the deck based on what the funding conditions were in the moment. And I'm trying to understand what kinds of flexibility by who exists in this kind of a structure.
I think your question provides good direction to staff to come back with some ideas maybe at the workshop on March 15th, because we haven't kind of thought through all those processes. I mean, we know that the city council will approve the plan before the PFA does. In approving that plan, you won't necessarily, the city council wouldn't tie the PFA to any given process, but that whole budgeting process is one that we need to kind of figure out. And I think the workshop will provide a good opportunity for us to present some options and some ideas.
And does the plan have to add up? Does the projects, if we were to list projects in the plan as opposed to just categories like transportation, does it have to add up to the projected tax increment?
It does not. One of the workshop items could be, what kind of CIP rough estimate or scope of projects do we put in? I mean, because we have a wide range of estimates, whether or not we include, $200 million bridges or streetcar. So that could be something where we also kind of present options to you.
And do you anticipate that the plan's going to have sort of policies around these issues or principles around these issues? I mean, one of them, it seems that in this new structure, we won't be able to do what we, but many others used to do with redevelopment, which is subsidize specific development projects in a big way. It looked like you could do some commercial industrial things in here, but the practice that other places has had, which we had largely avoided, but not totally, was to use redevelopment to fund a specific project. Whereas this approach seems more like our actual approach, which has been, no, we don't really do that. What we do is invest in making in the underlying infrastructure that then can support whoever's project is happening, rather than us picking the winners. Is that, what are the boundaries of how close we can get to project level financing?
You know, I think our intent with, let's say, the Bridge District IFD is we stuck as close as possible to the general language that was in the statute to give you maximum flexibility. You know, for instance, the authorized facilities was everything that was in the statute. And on November 16th, your resolution had a list of authorized facilities and uses, which mirrored the statute. And so it did include categories that could be private development if in the future the PFA and the city council so choose to budget funds to private development. Since this is all new, we haven't really defined eligible uses, or it hasn't been defined for us because we could be the first one doing it. But my impression, Aaron, you'll agree, is that it looks like reuse of an industrial facility. Well, you know, what if you put a coffee shop or a bike rental facility into it? You know, could you commit EIFD funds to that use? I mean, certainly that is implied in the legislation.
Yeah, so when at the legislative level, I want the maximum amount of flexibility possible, but now we're at the point of figuring out what's our plan and policies, and we should have some that bind us in you know, at least to the point where they require us to ask ourselves 3 times before we do something that we never would have done before. So that when, you know, when future PFA boards are faced with a single project developer coming to one of these meetings and saying, I have this great office building project, and if you just give me a $3 million subsidy, that'd be great, and the board votes to do it without any procedural safeguards to assure that, 1, the city concurs, and 2, that if it's not actually infrastructure, but it's someone's private project, that that it's causing us to come back, you know, we got to hear that 5 times, or so, you know, something. So this is it seems like the plan is the moment to at least start to develop the scaffolding for how those decisions and choices are going to get made. And maybe, and at least from my perspective, building in the kind of the best practices that we had been exhibiting for the last, you know, decade on the way that we expanded redevelopment. And again, those weren't hard rules. We did occasionally do some project level subsidies. So it wasn't like absolutely never, but if we try to create a system and a decision process that is at least puts our foot on the right pedal, it seems like the plan is the right place to do that. So it's not just some mysterious thing that you know, staff or a couple of council members are doing, but it's actually relatively transparent as to what our overall strategy is. It also is very helpful for, even though they may not like it in the moment, it's much better for your colleagues in economic development and the city manager's office, and for us to when a private developer, just to use that example, comes to us and says, I have this great project, we need $3 million. If we can say, but our policy, the plan, the EIFD plan is that the funds are for infrastructure and related projects that improve the developability of everybody's land, as opposed to being used for individual ones. It just makes it easier for us to maintain that discipline individually as well as collectively.
At the workshop, we'll make sure that, you know, we have at least a starter list of some of the policy issues for you to consider. Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, the thing about the Bridge District is that you had development agreements, you had a specific plan, you'd had years of negotiations that resulted in policies that were just assumed, so we didn't include them in the plan. Right. Here, I totally agree. There's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, Bridge District is a great example, because before we did that plan, we did have projects, individual projects that said, I have an office building, give me $3 million. And thank God we didn't spend our money that way, because we wouldn't have been able to relocate the rail or do any of the other things that we ultimately did to make that project and to make our contribution to make the actual infrastructure work. Okay. The other question I have is on just one other policy issue, which is that because the expansiveness of what's allowed and also the geographic expansiveness of what's allowed in the statute, the making clear in our plan or our policy the nexus between these are resources available for infrastructure and improvements and enhancements throughout the community, throughout the district and related areas, but that we're making the investments at least largely or in part with an eye towards improving the tax increment. Right? Now, that's obvious to you finance people. It's not so obvious when people come to here or to the council and say, we have this, we have this park that we would like to improve or to add another acre to or whatever that may have no relationship to the economic strategy or infrastructure strategy that would drive the revenue that we need out of the district. So that's another example of the sort of policy framework that's useful to put in the plan from the beginning. So it doesn't lead everyone to think, this is, okay, now we can spend $100 million on Bright Park. Right? It may be that there's a Bright Park nexus with respect to the district, but it ought to be, we ought to have essentially a lens of tests, and you should too, around what are the kinds of things that are high priority investments.
That's a perfect example. We have the legislation where we look at definition of the use of the funds having a tangible connectivity to the EIFD and having community-wide significance. If we left the plan with just that language, it could be anything. It could be interpreted as anything.
Right. So we just want to give ourselves some direction and some boundaries that we could potentially cross if we needed to, but that at least that 99% of the time would lead us to the right behavior. So the question is, the last component of the plan, the last bullet here, is potential impacts on residents and housing. What is that likely to mean?
So in EIFD law, it says that to the extent that you know that you're going to result in the relocation of residents, you need to address how you will deal with that in the plan. It could be as simple as we will not impact, we won't have projects that result in the dislocation of residents, therefore, that's our policy. Or you can include, some standards and some policies about how you deal with residential relocation. That's one thing that we've been talking about, actually, because, potentially there would be projects in the future where you could result, if you were using EIFD to fund a project that was a roadway that was going to go through a residential area and you had to move a couple houses, then your plan should at least say how you're going to fund the relocation, because there are affordability requirements. For instance, it's, I think, 60 years on rental, 45 years on ownership, where you have to have covenants that you will keep that affordability in place for that time frame. So things like that would need to be built into the plan if we anticipated that we would impact residents.
So, and does that include not indirect displacement and gentrification and those sorts of issues, or is that provision of the law specifically targeted at essentially direct
We
displacement?
believe it's a direct, the funds are going to a project that has a direct impact.
Okay. Other questions or comments? I would also note that on this item, the actual resolution that staff has proposed includes the designation of our officers and key officials, and the staff, the item includes the designation of a chair and vice chair. That's really to the board's discretion. So the city managers clarified that it was not their intent to make a recommendation among us who should be our chair and vice chair. So that is an open decision that we need to make before adopting the resolution, so we can insert those names. So why don't we do that? Are there so the ultimate motion will be on the resolution, but I guess the first one is if there are nominees for chair and for vice chair. They are listed in here, but.
I'll move the recommended action. That's you, or who's the vice chair?
Yeah, maybe if we could just make it as your recommendation first. So because we generally don't like to have our staff recommend who we pick among ourselves as our officers. So.
That the mayor act as the chair, Edmund, since he's not here, be nominated as the vice chair.
I'll second that.
All right, so that's been moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations or amendments? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. So we'll incorporate that then into the resolution as an amendment. So any other questions or discussion on the resolution and the rest of the recommended action? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Board Member McGowan and seconded by Board Member Esquivel. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Thank you very much. Item 6A, Executive Director Report.
Well, Mr. Chair, and the Vice Chair is not here. He was confirmed, but apparently the message didn't get through that he would not be here tonight, so I apologize on behalf of Mr. Ledesma, or the new Vice Chair.
He got what's coming to him just now. so-
Yeah.
This is, staff refers this as a historic meeting. Had we done this yesterday near Tower Bridge, we would have had a big media crowd. I think maybe they burn out on West Sacramento issues, but clearly this is a big issue for us, and for the future, I think this sets well for the city. So appreciate the efforts of our staff and your attendance here tonight at this historic first meeting.
Is this the first meeting of a public financing authority for an EIFD in California?
To our
Wow,
knowledge,
that is
huh?
historic, yeah. Why is there no media here? That's,
Yeah.
all right. Any questions for the executive director?
And then our next meeting would be planned for March 15th, and then we would time these with council meetings so that we could minimize at least 3 members of the group in terms of coming to the same location. And if we don't have any need for a meeting, we will let you know and cancel those meetings.
Okay. And there's no report on PFA actions because we didn't exist. All right, so future agenda item requests, we don't have any. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
I'll second.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Cool.